If you're anything like me, your birthday stopped being a huge event a while ago. It's less about a party and more about a feeling. A quiet, personal permission slip to do exactly what you want with the people who make you feel most at ease. That's what I was aiming for this year. A dinner, just 6 of us, around my dining table, with good food, some wine, and the deep meandering conversations that only happen when the group is small and trusted. It was supposed to be a soft landing in the middle of a chaotic year. But as I sit here now, the morning after sending a text that has torn a seam in a 20-year friendship, that feeling of ease is gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence and a question I can't shake. Am I the one who messed up? The conflict on the surface is absurdly simple. It's about a pasta salad. But of course, it's never really about the pasta salad, is it? It's about everything the pasta salad represents. All the unspoken rules, the accumulated history, the delicate ecosystem of a long-term friendship that you realize, too late, has been operating on a fragile truce for years. My name is Maya, and I turned 38 yesterday. The plan was perfect. I'd spent the weekend before preparing. I made a rich, slow-cooked ragu. I baked a loaf of sourdough. I assembled a simple but beautiful cheese board. I even polished my grandmother's silverware, something I only do for occasions that feel sacred in their simplicity. The only thing I'd asked of my guests was to bring a side dish or a bottle of wine, just to share the load and add a bit of communal spirit to the meal. No assignments, no pressure, just bring something you love. The texts started coming in the day before. Sam was bringing his famous roasted potatoes with rosemary. Leo was bringing a case of natural wine from a shop he'd been raving about. Jenna, ever the baker, was making olive oil cake. Then there was Claire. Claire and I have been friends since our first week of college. We've seen each other through bad relationships, career flops, family losses, and the general weathering of life. Our bond is deep, but it is not effortless. It requires maintenance, like a vintage car that you love but that has a temperamental engine. Her text came in at 4:17 p.m. Can't wait to celebrate you. I'm bringing my amazing buffalo chicken pasta salad. It's a huge batch, so there will be leftovers for you. Attached was a photo. The image is seared into my mind. It was a vast, translucent plastic mixing bowl, the kind you'd see in a commercial kitchen. It was filled to the brim with a substance that was an aggressive orange hue, flecked with chunks of what looked like processed chicken and celery. It swam in a thin, glistening dressing. Sitting on the counter next to it for scale was a family-sized bag of tortilla chips and a 2-liter bottle of generic cola. The presentation was so starkly at odds with the evening I had envisioned. It wasn't about it being fancy. It was about a fundamental mismatch of tone, of effort, of understanding the assignment. I stared at my phone screen in my quiet kitchen, the muted afternoon light catching the dust motes in the air. The scent of my simmering ragu, deep and aromatic, filled the space, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't a side dish. This was a statement. It was the same statement Claire had been making for years at every potluck, every gathering. A deliberate, almost performative rejection of the vibe. It was her saying, I don't do curated, I do volume and convenience. And for years I'd smiled, made room on the table, and taken a polite spoonful. But this time, on my birthday, at my small, intentional table, the thought of that bowl sitting next to my grandmother's platter, of that sharp, vinegary smell cutting through the ragu, it felt like a violation of a boundary I hadn't even known I'd drawn. I took a long, slow breath. The silence of the house was absolute, and in that silence, I made a decision. I typed out a message. My thumb hovered over the send button for a full minute, my heart thudding against my ribs. Then I pressed it. Claire, I need to be honest. I've thought about it, and I don't think the dinner tomorrow is going to be a good fit. Let's take a rain check on celebrating, just the 2 of us, next week. The response was immediate. 3 pulsating dots. Then, what are you talking about? Because of the pasta salad? You're disinviting me over food? The hollowness in my stomach turned to a sharp, sick ache. The story, of course, starts long before a text message. It starts in 2 different homes, in 2 different worlds, with 2 different definitions of what it means to show you care. To understand why a bowl of pasta salad could feel like a declaration of war, you have to understand my mother's kitchen. It was a temple of quiet intention, not a wealthy kitchen, we were solidly middle class, but a place of profound respect for ritual. Meals were never slapdash. They were composed. A Tuesday night meatloaf was served with properly mashed potatoes, a green vegetable roasted until just tender, and gravy made from the pan drippings. The table was always set, napkins in rings, water glasses filled. It was my mother's love language, her art form, and her primary mode of control. There was a right way to do everything, the correct knife for chopping an onion, the specific pot for boiling pasta. Food was never just fuel. It was an expression of care, of stability, of doing things properly. A can of cream of mushroom soup was viewed with deep suspicion. A pre-made salad dressing was an unforgivable shortcut. This created an environment that was, aesthetically, beautiful. I learned to appreciate quality, seasonality, the slow build of flavor. But emotionally, it was a pressure cooker. A misshapen cookie was quietly discarded. An oversalted soup was a minor tragedy. Love was conditional on getting the details right. My role was to be the appreciative audience, to set the table perfectly, to notice the nuances. My praise was her reward. It was a quiet, tense, and beautiful way to grow up. My father was a kind, absent-minded professor type who lived in his head. He adored my mother's cooking, but was blissfully unaware of the labor and anxiety that produced it. He'd wander in, kiss her on the head, and say, "Smells wonderful, dear." And that was his entire contribution. The unspoken message to me was clear. Creating this beauty was women's work, and its value was in the silent, flawless execution, not in the burden it represented. Now, imagine Claire's childhood home, as she described it to me during late-night dorm room talks. Controlled chaos. A bustling, noisy, affectionate household with 4 kids. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Food was about abundance, efficiency, and appeasing picky eaters. The table was a landing pad for takeout boxes, delivery pizzas, and massive one-pot casseroles made with canned cream and frozen vegetables. The more processed, the more guaranteed it was to be eaten without complaint. Love was shown in heaping portions, in buying the name-brand sugary cereal as a treat, in the loud, jostling fight for the last breadstick. There was no correct way. The only rule was that there was enough for everyone. A successful meal was one where no one went hungry and the mess was contained to the kitchen. Her mother's love was in the providing, not the perfecting. It was generous, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of the aesthetic pressure that defined my own home. Claire grew up proud of this. She saw it as authentic, unpretentious, and resilient. She learned to feed a crowd on a budget, to not sweat the small stuff, and to view my mother's type of cooking as a baffling, time-consuming hobby for people who didn't have real problems. When Claire and I met in college, this difference was a novelty, a source of amusement. She'd tease me for organizing our shared fridge. I'd stare, wide-eyed, as she made ramen surprise with whatever leftovers were in the mini-fridge. She'd drag me to all-you-can-eat buffets, and I'd introduce her to a proper farmer's market. For a while, it was complimentary. I felt loosened up by her. She felt refined by me. We bonded over being away from home, and our food backgrounds were just part of our quirky friendship tapestry. But the foundational difference was always there, humming in the background. For me, food was how you curated an experience and demonstrated thoughtful care. For Claire, food was how you demonstrated generous, no-strings-attached abundance. Neither is wrong, but they speak different languages. The first crack appeared at a potluck our junior year. I'd spent a weekend's worth of my meager work-study earnings on ingredients for a butternut squash and sage risotto, stirring it patiently for 40 minutes. Claire brought a giant bag of store-bought meatballs, still in their plastic container, submerged in a slow cooker full of grape jelly and chili sauce. The dish was devoured in minutes. My risotto was politely sampled. Claire crowed with victory. "See, I told you people want good, easy comfort food, not fancy restaurant stuff." She meant it as a joke, but it landed with a thud in the center of my chest. It felt like a dismissal of my effort, of my language of care. I smiled and said it was all about having options, but I remember scraping the leftover risotto into a container later, the creamy rice now gummy and cold, feeling a strange sense of shame, as if I'd tried too hard. After college, the divergence in our food languages became a metaphor for the divergence in our lives. I moved to a small city, took a job at a design firm, and spent my 20s in a series of apartments that I painstakingly tried to make feel like homes. My kitchen was my sanctuary. After the controlled pressure of my mother's kitchen, I was learning to cook for myself, for joy. It was my rebellion and my therapy, a messy, imperfect, but deeply personal exploration. I'd host small dinners for colleagues or a new boyfriend. They were intimate, sometimes awkward, but always intentional. The food was my offering, my way of saying, "This is me. I made this for you." Claire stayed closer to home, took a stable, well-paying job in logistics, and embraced a practical, no-fuss approach to life. She bought a condo early and furnished it from a single store in one weekend. Her entertaining was legendary in its scale and informality. "Come over any time, there's always beer and a frozen pizza," she'd say, and she meant it. Her parties were loud, packed, and fueled by giant sub-sandwiches, buckets of wings, and kegs. They were fun in a way that was completely draining to me. I'd leave feeling overstimulated and oddly lonely, like I'd been in a crowd but hadn't connected with a single person. Our friendship persisted through phone calls and occasional visits, but the potluck dynamic solidified. Any group gathering became a low-grade source of anxiety for me. If I brought a carefully constructed autumn harvest salad with candied pecans and goat cheese, Claire would bring a 7-layer dip made with canned refried beans and pre-shredded taco blend cheese, and she would always make a point of presenting it with a flourish. "Move over that rabbit food, here's the real meal." The group would laugh and dig in, and I'd stand there, my salad feeling suddenly frivolous and silly. I began to suspect it wasn't ignorance, it was a choice, a deliberate positioning. In Claire's world, my way of doing things, the careful selection, the presentation, the emphasis on flavor and quality, wasn't just different, it was pretentious, it was putting on airs. Her way was authentic, real, down to earth. By framing it that way, she automatically won the moral high ground in any culinary encounter. My effort was read as snobbery. Her lack of effort was read as integrity. I never confronted it. Why would I? How do you say, "Your 7-layer dip offends my sensibilities," without sounding like the worst person alive? So I swallowed it. I'd laugh along, take a chip, and make sure to compliment her on how crowd-pleasing her dish was. I was being polite, but in truth, I was being cowardly. I was failing to speak my own language in my own defense, for fear of being exactly the judgmental, uptight person she seemed to think I was. This dynamic seeped into other areas. My choice to see a therapist was overthinking. My interest in art house films was trying too hard. My preference for a quiet drink over a raucous bar crawl was being antisocial. They were always delivered with a loving elbow nudge, "You're so extra, Maya." But the cumulative effect was a slow erosion. I found myself downplaying my interests, my efforts, my way of moving through the world when I was with her. The friendship, which once felt expansive, began to feel like a box I had to fold myself into. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday. I was 37. I'd just ended a long-term relationship that was, in hindsight, a lot like my friendship with Claire. I was doing all the accommodating, sanding down my own edges to fit into someone else's idea of what was normal and sensible. In the hollow, painful silence after the breakup, I started therapy in earnest, not casually, but with a commitment to unthreading why I kept finding myself in relationships where my own needs felt like an inconvenience. That year, I made a promise to myself. I would practice saying what I meant and wanting what I wanted without apology. It started small, telling a colleague I didn't like a restaurant they had suggested, buying a piece of art for my apartment that was weird and not just decorative, saying no to invitations when I was tired. It was terrifying and exhilarating. I felt for the first time like I was inhabiting my own body, my own life, fully. My birthday, the one that just passed, was meant to be the culmination of that year of practice. It wasn't about turning 38, it was about celebrating the person I was finally becoming. The person who could say, "This is what I like. This is the atmosphere I want. This is my celebration. The guest list was a conscious curation of people who spoke my language, not necessarily about food, but about mutual respect. People who listened, who showed up thoughtfully, who didn't make me feel extra for caring about details. When I sent the group text about the dinner, the phrasing was important. I'm cooking a cozy birthday dinner and would love for you to join. If you'd like to contribute, feel free to bring a side or a bottle of anything you're loving right now. It was an invitation, not a summons. It implied a shared understanding of cozy. It trusted them to interpret a side in a spirit of harmony. The responses from Sam, Leo, and Jenna were perfect. They asked thoughtful questions. What's the main, so I can compliment it? Any dietary preferences I should work around? Would a crisp white or a light red work better? It felt collaborative. It felt seen. Then came Claire's text. The photo of the buffalo chicken pasta salad wasn't just a photo of a dish. It was a cannonball launched into the carefully constructed pond of my evening. It was, in the context of our history, a refusal to speak the language of the event. It wasn't just different, it felt disruptive. The sheer scale of it, a huge batch so there will be leftovers for you, framed it as a correction, a necessary injection of real food into what she likely perceived as my inevitably insufficient, fussy spread. Seeing that photo on my screen, in my quiet kitchen, was a sensory overload. I could smell the sharp, vinegary hot sauce. I could taste the overly sweet, gloopy mayonnaise dressing. I could hear the inevitable comment, "All right, make room for the main event." I could see the look on my other friends' faces, polite, bemused, a little confused as this culinary monument to convenience was placed beside the lovingly made dishes they'd brought. In that moment, it wasn't about snobbery. It was about self-preservation. It was about the promise I'd made to myself. Allowing that bowl onto my table felt like a betrayal of my own growth. It felt like reopening the door to the dynamic where I had to shrink, accommodate, and silently absorb a message that my way of doing things was less valid, less authentic. On my birthday, in my own home, I simply couldn't do it. The year of work I'd done screamed inside me. You have a right to the evening you envisioned. You do not have to accept every offering, especially one that feels like a subtle negation of who you are. The decision crystallized not in anger, but in a profound, sad clarity. This wasn't a friendship-ending act, but it was a boundary, and for the first time, I knew I had to draw it, even if the tool I had to use felt brutally blunt, a text message disinviting my oldest friend. The 3 dots pulsed after her reply. The silence in my house was no longer peaceful. It was charged, like the air before a storm. My phone vibrated again. Claire. Seriously, Maya, this is a joke, right? You're actually this upset about a pasta salad? I put the phone down on the counter. I walked to the window, looked out at the gray afternoon, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. I could feel the old patterns rising up, the urge to diffuse, to apologize, to say, "You're right, it's silly, of course you should come." I could almost hear my mother's voice, a ghost of etiquette past. A good hostess makes everyone feel welcome, no matter what, but a newer, firmer voice pushed back. A good hostess also has a right to her own peace. I picked up the phone. I knew a text chain would spiral. I needed to hear her voice and for her to hear mine. I needed to know if there was any chance she could understand this wasn't about the dish, but the decades of context it carried. I called. She answered on the second ring. "Hello." Her voice was tight, clipped. "Claire, it's me." "I know who it is. What is going on with you?" I took a breath. "This is hard to explain, but the pasta salad, it's not about the pasta salad itself." "Then what the hell is it about, Maya? Because from here, it looks like you've decided my cooking isn't good enough for your fancy birthday party." There it was, the accusation I'd dreaded. It landed and it stung, because it was the easiest, most superficial interpretation. "It's not about good enough," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's about fit. Claire, this dinner is small. It's just 6 people. I've been cooking for days. I asked people to bring something they love, something that would feel cohesive. Your text felt like you were bringing enough to feed 20 people to a tailgate. It just feels like a completely different event than the one I'm trying to create." The line was silent for a moment. Then she let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, I get it. Cohesive. You mean matchy-matchy. You mean it doesn't fit your aesthetic. God, Maya, you sound like a lifestyle blogger. It's a birthday, not a photo shoot. I was trying to bring something I know people love, something I'm good at making, and plenty of it, so you wouldn't have to worry about running out. But I guess that's the wrong kind of thoughtful, isn't it?" Each word was a needle. She had a gift for reframing my feelings as pretension and her actions as pure, practical generosity. The old me would have crumbled. "It is thoughtful," I conceded, forcing myself to be fair. "But it's thoughtful in your language. And for this one night I was asking, implicitly, for people to speak in mine. Sam is bringing rosemary potatoes. Jenna is making an olive oil cake. It's about a shared vibe, a quiet, intimate, homemade vibe. Your dish feels like it belongs at a completely different, much louder party." "So I'm too loud for you now, too?" Her voice cracked, and for the first time I heard hurt beneath the anger. "Is that it? I'm too much? Not refined enough for your new, curated life with your curated friends? That's not fair, Claire. And you know it's not true." But did she know? Had I ever been truly honest? This isn't about refinement. It's about mutual understanding. For years, at every gathering, I feel like you bring things deliberately to make a point, that my way of doing things is fussy and silly. And I don't want that energy at my table tomorrow, not on my birthday. The silence that followed was long and heavy. I could hear the hum of her refrigerator in the background. "So after 20 years, she said slowly, each word dropping like a stone, "you're telling me my friendship doesn't fit your vibe? That I'm an energy you need to manage? Wow, just wow." "I'm telling you that your contribution doesn't fit the vibe of this specific dinner," I said, trying desperately to draw the distinction. "I'm asking for a rain check, for us to celebrate separately." "A rain check," she repeated, dripping with sarcasm. "Right. Because you've made it so clear how much you value my company. You know what, Maya? Fine. Have your perfect, cohesive, vibe-appropriate dinner. I hope it's everything you've ever wanted." The click in my ear was final. She'd hung up. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dead silence. The conflict had escalated far beyond a side dish. It had ripped the scab off every unspoken resentment, every time I'd felt judged, every time she'd felt looked down upon. We were no longer arguing about pasta salad. We were arguing about our fundamental worth to each other and whether our two different languages of care could ever truly be translated. I slid down to sit on my kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets. The smell of the ragu, once so comforting, now felt cloying. What had I done? In trying to honor myself, had I just committed an unforgivable act of friendship betrayal? The certainty I'd felt moments before was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of doubt and grief. The dinner happened. The space where Claire would have sat remained empty. A part of me hoped, right up until the moment we sat down, that she might show up anyway, with a simple bottle of wine, having chosen connection over principle. But she didn't. The evening was, in a purely objective sense, lovely. The food was delicious. The conversation flowed easily. Sam's potatoes were crispy and fragrant, Leo's wines were fascinating, Jenna's cake was sublime, my ragu was rich and deeply flavored. We talked about work, art, a book we'd all read, the gentle, meandering topics of people who are comfortable with silence as well as speech. But for me, it was haunted. Every time there was a lull in conversation, I felt the ghost of Claire's laugh, the missing volume. When we passed the dishes around, my eyes kept going to the empty space on the table where her giant bowl would have sat. I found myself overcompensating, laughing too loudly, being an overly attentive hostess. My friends, being perceptive, could sense something was off. "Everything okay, Maya?" Jenna asked softly as we cleared the plates. "You seem a little distracted." I forced a smile. "Just tired from all the cooking. It was a wonderful night, really." It was true, and it wasn't. The dinner I had curated was perfect, and its perfection felt like a condemnation. It proved I could create the exact experience I wanted, but the cost was a palpable, aching absence. Had my vibe been worth it? Later, as I was loading the dishwasher alone, my phone lit up. It was a Facebook notification. Claire had posted. No text, just a single photo. It was the same giant bowl of buffalo chicken pasta salad, now sitting on her own coffee table. In the background, I could see a few other people. Her sister, a couple of neighbors, holding paper plates, laughing. The caption read, "When life gives you disinvitations, make a party. Plenty to go around for real friends who appreciate real food." The blow was physical. I actually stumbled back a step, gripping the edge of the counter. This was no longer a private conflict. This was a public shaming. She had weaponized our disagreement, framing herself as the wronged authentic hero and me as the shallow elitist villain. The comments were already rolling in. "OMG, that looks amazing. Their loss. More for you. Some people are so uptight. Real food for real people." Tears of hot, helpless anger burned my eyes. This was the breaking point. The private hurt was one thing. This public performance of victimhood, this deliberate twisting of the story to garner sympathy and validate her worldview, felt like a profound betrayal. It confirmed my deepest fear, that she truly believed my actions could only be explained by snobbery, that she was incapable of seeing the years of layered history, my quiet efforts to be understood, my attempt to finally set a boundary. In her narrative, I was a cartoon villain, and she was inviting the world to laugh at me. I didn't comment. I didn't text. I put my phone in a drawer. I finished cleaning the kitchen with a kind of robotic focus, the clatter of plates and glasses the only sound in the hollow apartment. The joy of the evening, the satisfaction of my curated gathering, had been completely erased. All that was left was the wreckage of a 20-year friendship and the echoing question, had my boundary been an act of self-care or an act of unforgivable cruelty? The breaking incident wasn't the disinvitation. It was that Facebook post. It took a complex, painful, private rift and turned it into a public meme. It showed me that for Claire, the conflict wasn't something to be worked through. It was something to be won. And in the court of public opinion, with a photo of a heaping bowl of real food, she held all the cards. I went to bed that night not as a 38-year-old woman who had thrown a nice dinner party, but as a pariah in a story I hadn't meant to write. The days that followed were a blur of emotional hangover. I felt bruised both from Claire's public post and from my own relentless self-interrogation. I replayed the phone call in my head 100 times. Had there been a magic combination of words that could have made her understand? Should I have just sucked it up, let her bring the pasta salad, and seethed silently as I had for years? Was keeping the peace more important than honoring my own discomfort? The support from my dinner friends was quiet but firm. Jenna sent me a text. Saw the post. That was unfair and hurtful. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Sam simply said, boundaries are hard. Proud of you. Their words were a balm, but they also solidified my isolation. They were on my side, which meant Claire was on the other. The friendship was now a battlefield with drawn lines. I avoided social media. The thought of seeing more comments, more Team Claire rallying cries, made me feel nauseous. My therapist, when I saw her, listened patiently as I spilled out the whole saga, from my mother's kitchen to the Facebook post. So, she said after a long pause, it sounds like for the first time, you communicated a need clearly, and the consequence was a relationship rupture. It feels like I nuked it over something trivial, I whispered. Was it trivial to you? She asked. I thought of the feeling in my gut when I saw the photo, the decades of being called extra, the quiet erosion. No, it wasn't trivial. Then you acted with integrity. You cannot control how the other person receives your boundary. You can only control how you set it. She chose to receive it as a personal attack and to retaliate publicly. That tells you something important about how she handles conflict. The words made sense intellectually, but my heart still ached. I mourned. I mourned the Claire from college, who was my partner in mischief. I mourned the friend who had held my hand through my father's illness. I cried for the inside jokes that would now die, for the shared history that had become a weapon. This wasn't a clean break. It was a messy, ragged tear in the fabric of my life. I thought about her perspective, truly tried to inhabit it. From her point of view, her oldest friend had rejected a generous celebratory offering. She felt judged and humiliated. Her public post was a classic hurt people response. It was a way to regain power, to gather a tribe around her, to shout, "See, I'm the good one here." I could understand the mechanics of it, even as I bled from the wound it caused. There was no resolution, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. A heavy, pregnant silence that stretched into weeks. The rain check I'd offered was clearly not going to happen. The ball was in her court, and she had kicked it off the field. I focused on the small, grounding rituals of my life. I cooked simple meals for myself. I went for long walks. I leaned into the friendships that felt effortless. The hollow space Claire left behind began, very slowly, to stop echoing so loudly. It's been 4 months now. Claire and I have not spoken. The Facebook post is still up, a fossil of our conflict. I've muted her, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. The initial storm of emotion has passed, leaving behind a landscape that is quieter, sadder, but clearer. I've come to understand that this wasn't a story about who was right and who was wrong. It was a story about compatibility. Some friendships are for a season, some for a reason, and some for a lifetime. Ours spanned seasons and reasons, but perhaps it wasn't built for the lifetime version of who we each became. We grew into people whose fundamental languages of care and community were too different. For years, we'd been trying to force a translation, and the disinvitation was the moment the dictionary burned. The growth for me has been profound. I learned that a boundary set in calm clarity is not an act of aggression. It is an act of self-definition. I also learned that boundaries have consequences, sometimes painful ones. The two exist together. You don't get the growth without the grief. I no longer feel like the villain in the story, nor do I cast Claire as one. She is a flawed human, as am I, operating from her own history and pain. Her way of showing love, through abundant no-fuss provision, is genuine. It just isn't the kind of love I need in my most intimate, curated spaces, and my way of showing love, through intention and aesthetic care, clearly felt to her like a judgment on her own. So, to answer the question I started with, am I the asshole for disinviting a friend after she showed me the food she was bringing? I don't think so. But I also don't think she's the asshole for being hurt and lashing out. I think we were two people speaking different emotional languages, and we finally had a conflict so loud it shattered the possibility of conversation. My birthday dinner taught me that it's okay to want what you want, to create the atmosphere that feeds your soul. It also taught me that doing so might mean making room for some empty chairs at the table. And you have to be willing to sit with the silence in those chairs and understand that the peace you've created for yourself is worth the space they leave behind. If there's a question I'm left with for all of you, it's this. Have you ever had to let go of a long-term friendship, not because of a dramatic betrayal, but because you simply grew into people who no longer knew how to care for each other in the same way? How did you make peace with that quiet, undramatic ending? Thanks for listening to my story. If these kinds of complicated, real-life reflections resonate with you, I invite you to like and subscribe for more. It means more than you know.